I didn't know the night would change the way I saw myself, until the front door closed behind him, and a stranger's presence filled our living room like a held breath. Even now, when I think about it, I don't remember the first sound. I remember the feeling. The apartment had been full all evening. Glasses touching, low music, polite laughter bouncing off polished walls, the soft choreography of people who know how to seem relaxed while still performing themselves. Daniel was good at nights like that. He always had been. He could move through a room with a glass in one hand and a half smile on his face, and make everyone feel as if they had just said the cleverest thing he'd heard all week. Our apartment seemed made for that kind of life. It sat high above the city on the corner of a quiet block, all pale walls, dark wood, clean lines, and a balcony that looked out over a sweep of lights so beautiful at night they almost didn't seem real. People always paused when they stepped outside. They would go still, rest their elbows on the railing, and say some version of the same thing. "You too are lucky." I used to smile when they said that. That night, after midnight, after the last of the guests drifted downstairs to the building's rooftop lounge to keep the party going, after the jazz record had ended and the apartment had settled into that strange hush that follows performance, Adrian was still there. Daniel's friend, or not exactly his friend, more like one of those men who slip in and out of a couple's social orbit until they become part of the background before anyone realizes how much space they take up. He had known Daniel on and off for years through some chain of old business and old loyalty I never fully understood. He was the kind of man people noticed before they knew why they were noticing him. Not because he was loud. He had the opposite quality, a kind of stillness that made other people seem over-explained. He stood near the window with his jacket over one arm, the city reflecting faintly behind him. The apartment was dim, except for the lamp by the sofa and the spill of gold from the hallway. His tie was loosened. His sleeves were rolled back once. He looked like the sort of man who belonged in places where difficult conversations happened late. Daniel had gone to the kitchen to refill a glass of water. I was in the bedroom doorway, one hand still touching the frame, and for a second it was just me and Adrian and the quiet in between us. No one had said anything unforgivable yet. Nothing had happened that could not still be explained away. But the air had already changed. It felt crowded with something that had been trying to become visible for months, maybe longer. The truth is, before that night, my marriage had not felt unhappy. That would be easier to explain if it had. People understand anger. They understand slammed doors, cold wars, tears in parked cars, missing rings left too deliberately on bathroom counters. Those things make betrayal legible. They give it a shape. What Daniel and I had instead was something gentler and more dangerous. We were polite, careful, predictable. 3 years into our marriage, we had built a life that looked complete from the outside. There were dinner parties and hand-thrown ceramic bowls and Sunday morning coffee on the balcony. There were linen napkins folded into drawers by color, playlists for rainy evenings, texts about good olive oil, jokes that only worked because we had said them often enough to turn them into furniture. Daniel was thoughtful in all the ways people admire. He remembered birthdays. He booked reservations before places became impossible to get into. He noticed when I was tired and left tea by my side of the bed without saying anything sentimental about it. There was love in our marriage. I want to say that clearly, because what happened next only makes sense if there was. But love had gone quiet. It had learned how to whisper instead of shout. It had become orderly, efficient. It lived in grocery lists and calendar reminders, and the clean click of Daniel loading the dishwasher exactly the way he liked it. We did not fight much, because we did not reach each other in the right places often enough to provoke true damage. We moved around each other skillfully, beautifully even. And somewhere inside that beautiful skill, I had started disappearing. Before Daniel, before the apartment and the married dinners and the lovely, measured life, I had painted every day. Not as a hobby, not as a charming detail, as a way of existing. I had a studio then, not grand, not romantic, but mine. Paint under my nails, music too loud, windows open, hours lost without apology. My body belonged to impulse, curiosity, failure, color. I made things because I needed to, and the need itself felt clean. Then life changed the way it always does, gradually enough that surrender can disguise itself as maturity. The studio went first, then the afternoons, then the version of myself who believed wanting something badly was reason enough to protect it. I told myself I was growing up, being practical, making room for a marriage, for social obligations, for the shape of the life Daniel and I were building. What I did not admit, even to myself, was that each small compromise taught me how to shrink elegantly. By the time I was 33, I had become very good at being pleasant in rooms that would have terrified the younger version of me. I knew how to host, how to laugh at the right places, how to wear silk and stand near candlelight and give people the impression of a woman fully at home in her life. But inside me, there was a low, private ache I did not know how to name without sounding ungrateful. I missed being seen in a way that had nothing to do with being admired. I missed feeling alive before I had proof I deserved to. Daniel noticed more than I gave him credit for. I see that now. The first signs were so subtle, I mistook them for late-night melancholy. We would be in bed, the room dark except for the thin band of city light sneaking past the curtains, and he would ask things that didn't fit the hour. Do you still feel like yourself? Do you miss painting? Do you ever think we've gotten too good at being comfortable? Sometimes he would ask me about Adrian, in a tone that tried to sound casual and failed. Do you like talking to him? I would laugh and say he was interesting, which was true. Do you think he sees more than he says? That question stayed with me longer than it should have. At parties, Daniel had started watching me in an unfamiliar way. Not suspiciously, not possessively. It was stranger than that, as though he were not simply looking at me, but waiting for something to reveal itself through me. And there were moments, small, easy to dismiss moments, when he made comments that sat wrong in my chest. Some men like seeing their wives admired, he said once while drying a wineglass, not looking at me. It reminds them they haven't fallen asleep inside their own lives. I remember turning toward him then, a dish towel in my hand, unsure if he was joking. Were you admiring me in theory? I asked. He smiled in that unreadable way of his. I'm saying people are more complicated than they pretend to be. Then he changed the subject. I should have understood then that Daniel was not drifting blindly toward the edge of our marriage. He was standing there already, studying it. Adrian entered our life by inches, first at dinners, then at gallery openings, then at the apartment in the easy, unthreatening way friends become familiar enough not to need explanation. He was French by birth, though time in too many cities had blurred the sharpness out of his accent. He had the sort of face that made people project secrets onto him. Strong mouth, tired eyes, hair that never seemed intentionally arranged, and somehow always looked intentional. He listened with his whole body, which is more seductive than flirtation and far rarer. The first time I felt the shift between us, Daniel was right there. It was nothing, less than nothing. I had spilled a little wine on the kitchen counter while reaching for a second bottle, and Adrian handed me a cloth before I asked. Our fingers touched for a second too long. That was all. But when I looked up, Daniel was in the doorway watching us. Not angry, not amused, not even surprised, simply attentive. And that look did something dangerous inside me. Not because I wanted to betray him, because I suddenly felt visible to both men at once. And I could not remember the last time I had felt visible to anyone without first making myself smaller. After that, I started noticing everything. How Adrian stood a little too close when speaking quietly. How his eyes would find mine across a room and hold there half a second past politeness. How Daniel never interrupted those moments. Once, during a dinner party much like the one that would later undo us, I laughed at something Adrian said and put my hand briefly against his sleeve without thinking. Daniel saw it. I know he saw it. His gaze moved there and then to my face. He said nothing. That silence was not passive. I know that now. At the time it felt like mercy or maybe indifference. In truth it was permission, or at least the first shape of it. The night that changed everything began beautifully enough to be cruel. It was one of Daniel's gatherings. 12 people, good food, soft jazz, the kind of evening where everyone leaves feeling that they have spent time among adults who have mastered life with taste. I wore a black dress Daniel loved because it made me look, in his words, like midnight with shoulders. He kissed the back of my neck when I came out of the bedroom, and for one suspended moment, I thought perhaps I had imagined the distance between us, the questions, the restless undercurrent of the past months. Then Adrian arrived. He stood in the doorway with autumn cold still on his coat, and looked at me with an expression so quiet and open that I felt my pulse begin to misbehave before he had even crossed the threshold. Nothing happened at first. That was part of what made it unbearable. People ate, talked, laughed. The record changed. I refreshed candles. Someone opened another bottle of wine. Daniel moved through the room with easy precision, and every so often I would find his eyes on me, Not clinging, not suspicious, just present. Adrian sat beside me on the sofa later in the evening, when the party thinned into smaller conversations. Our knees almost touched. He asked if I was still painting. The question startled me enough that I laughed. "No one asks me that anymore," I said. "That's not an answer." I turned toward him. "No," I said after a moment. "Not really." "Why?" "Because life got crowded." His expression changed very slightly. "Life always gets crowded," he said. "That's why the important things don't survive unless someone is willing to be impolite for them." I felt the remark like a hand to the center of my chest. Across the room, Daniel looked up. I don't know how long he had been listening. Long enough. Later, when most of the guests had gone downstairs for the final round of drinks and the apartment was looser, dimmer, more intimate, Daniel suggested Adrian stay a little longer. He said it too casually, too smoothly, and I remember the strange flicker of awareness that passed through me then. Daniel wanted this night to continue. I did not yet know what that meant, only that it was true. The three of us drifted toward the bedroom almost by accident, if accidents can be made from 100 small permissions. Daniel said the music was too loud in the living room. Adrian laughed. I followed because I was no longer sure whether I was choosing or simply moving inside a choice that had already been made. In the bedroom, the city lights came through the windows in silver bands. The bed was still half turned down. Daniel sat at the foot of it, one ankle resting over the opposite knee, water glass in hand. Adrian stood near the dresser. I remained by the window because I suddenly needed the coolness of the glass at my back. No one touched me then. What happened first was conversation, which somehow felt more intimate. Daniel asked me if I was happy. Not generally. Not as a moral category. Now, in this room, I remember staring at him, wondering why his voice sounded so steady when mine had already gone untrustworthy. "Why are you asking me that?" I said. "Because I want you to answer," he said. I looked from my husband to the other man in our bedroom and felt the world tilt a degree further off center. Adrian should have left then. I thought he would. In any sane version of the night, he would have apologized, smiled, taken his coat, and turned all of us back into decent people by force. But he didn't move. Instead, he said softly, almost to Daniel as much as to me, "I can go if that's what she wants." The way he said she made me feel suddenly, and sharply, that the room had been arranged around my answer. Daniel's gaze never left mine. "Do you want him to go?" It would be comforting to tell you I said yes, that I chose safety immediately and cleanly, and all the damage came after. But that is not what happened. What happened is that I stood there with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. And for the first time in years, I felt fully, dangerously awake. Guilty, frightened, desired, not by one man or the other exactly, but by the fact of my own wanting. I had spent so long being careful that the possibility of not being careful felt almost holy. "No," I whispered. The word landed and stayed. After that, the room changed beyond retrieval. Adrian crossed to me slowly enough that I could have stopped him at any point. "That matters. I need it to matter." His hand lifted, hesitated near my face, and only touched me when I didn't move away. Nothing explicit happened then, nothing that would shock the world. But to me, it felt seismic. The simple intimacy of being looked at without being managed, without being asked to stay calm, stay polished, stay sensible. He touched the side of my neck with the back of his fingers, as though checking whether I was real. I turned my head and closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, Daniel was still watching. That was the moment guilt should have stopped me. Instead, it was part of the force pulling me forward. Because Daniel did not look broken. He looked exposed, raw in a way I had never seen him, as if something he had hidden even from himself was finally standing in the room with us. My pulse roared in my ears. Adrian leaned in, close enough that his breath touched my cheek, and I could still hear Daniel behind him, still hear the city, still hear the party downstairs bleeding faintly upward through the vents. The world had not ended. That was part of the madness. Ordinary life continued around the edge of what we were doing. I let the boundary blur. That is the cleanest way I know to say it. I let the moment go further than a married woman should let it go. I let myself be held in a way that made the old, buried, hungering part of me rise so quickly it felt like waking from underwater. My back found the window. My hands lost their certainty. Somewhere in the room, Daniel put his glass down. And then, through the confusion and heat of it, he spoke. "Don't look away from me." The sentence cut through everything. I turned toward him. He was no longer at the foot of the bed. He had come closer without my noticing, close enough now that I could see the strain in his face, the cost of whatever truth he was allowing to exist between us. No matter what happens, he said quietly, keep your eyes on me. If I had doubted then that this was accidental, that doubt ended in that sentence. I pulled back just enough to breathe. Daniel, he shook his head once, not harshly. Please, he said. Don't turn me into a liar now. I stared at him. The words made no sense at first. Then too much sense. He had known, or wanted, or feared, some unbearable combination of all three. The room suddenly felt too small to hold what was happening. I stepped away from the window and from Adrian both, one hand to my chest, trying to gather myself back into shape. What is this? I asked. Neither man answered immediately. That silence was the first honest thing any of us had done all night. Then Adrian said, with more gravity than I expected, this stops if you want it to stop. Daniel looked at him then, really looked at him, and what passed between them was not rivalry. It was something more humiliating and more intimate. Recognition. As though each man had known, he was walking toward a line and was finally seeing where the other stood relative to it. I couldn't stay in that room another second. I left them and went into the bathroom, locking the door behind me harder than I meant to. Steam still lingered from showers taken earlier by guests getting ready. The mirror was half fogged. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus and soap. An expensive candle wax burned almost to the end. I gripped the sink with both hands and stared at myself. My lipstick was smudged at one corner. My hair had come loose. My eyes looked brighter than they had in months, and that fact filled me with a shame so sharp it almost made me sick. A soft knock came at the door. Then Daniel's voice. Open it. I should have sent him away. Instead, I unlocked the door. He came in first, Adrian behind him after a beat, because by then privacy had become meaningless between us. The bathroom was too warm and too small for 3 people, carrying that much truth. I stood by the sink. Daniel leaned against the opposite wall. Adrian remained near the door, as though prepared to leave the instant I asked. From downstairs came the muffled throb of music and a burst of laughter from the party that had moved on without us. Then Daniel said the thing I think he had been carrying for months. I wasn't afraid of losing you to another man. He paused. I was afraid we had stopped being honest about who we are. I felt my breath catch. He went on carefully, as if saying the words too quickly would deform them. I saw the way you looked at him. Not once. For months. I saw the way you came alive when he spoke to you. And I kept waiting for you to tell me something was wrong, or something was missing, or that you were lonely in ways I could not fix with dinner parties and careful attention and all the correct gestures. But you didn't say it. You just got quieter. I couldn't speak. Partly because he was right, partly because I had thought I was the only one carrying a hidden ache in our marriage. I asked, almost whispering, did you plan this? Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Not like this, he said. Not every step. But I stopped interrupting things I should have interrupted. I kept inviting him. I kept watching. I kept wondering if seeing you wanted would wake something in you. Or in us. And then I hated myself for wondering it. And then I kept wondering it anyway. The confession should have made me furious first. Instead, it broke my heart. Not because I approved. I didn't. But because I suddenly saw how frightened he had been. Not of scandal. Not even of betrayal. Of deadness. Of becoming one of those elegant couples who age inside a beautiful apartment while never again touching the deepest parts of each other's lives. Adrian spoke then, and his voice was different from before. Less charged. More human. I won't be the fracture in your marriage, he said. If this costs you each other, I walk out right now. No one moved. Then there came a knock at the bathroom door from the hallway. Sharp. Startling. Someone from the party downstairs calling upward for Daniel, probably, or asking if the guest bath was free. The door handle rattled once. The sound jolted all 3 of us back into the fact of the outside world. I remember laughing then, a short, breathless sound that bordered on panic. Because of course that would happen. Of course the world would demand an answer, while we were still raw and unmade, and not remotely ready to step back into public light. Daniel took 1 step toward me. This is what I should have told you months ago, he said. I don't want the version of you that edits herself to keep me comfortable. That sentence undid me more than any touch that night, because it named the thing I had spent years doing without ever fully admitting it, editing myself for comfort, for peace, for elegance, for marriage, for being chosen, for being easy to live beside. Tears came then, sudden and humiliating. And because there was no point pretending anymore, I told the truth too. I miss myself, I said. I miss wanting things without apologizing for them. I miss painting. I miss feeling like I enter a room instead of just appearing in it. I miss not being afraid that if I ask for too much, everything good will break. Daniel's face changed. Not into shock, into grief. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought being a good wife meant being grateful, I said. And because once you start shrinking, it gets embarrassing to admit how small you've become. Adrian looked away then, giving us the dignity of a partial privacy we had already lost. Daniel reached for my hand. I let him take it. Not tonight, I said. Not like this. Not in secret, and not because the room got too hot and the line got blurry and all three of us stopped pretending. If anything happens after tonight, it happens in honesty, on purpose, with both of us awake inside it. A strange peace moved through Daniel's face then. Not relief exactly, more like the release that comes when the worst truth in the room has finally been named, and somehow the ceiling still holds. I know, he said. The door rattled again. Adrian opened it a few inches, spoke something calm and dismissive to whoever was outside, and shut it once more. Then Daniel did something I still think about when I stand at that sink. He stepped toward me, cupped the back of my neck, and kissed me. Not to claim me, not to perform possession in front of the other man, to re-enter the truth with me. The kiss was fierce and almost desperate, but what shook me was the sadness inside it. The tenderness, the apology, the years of composure collapsing just enough for me to feel the frightened, wanting man beneath it. When he pulled back, he looked at Adrian and said quietly, "You don't get to be the end of us." Adrian gave the slightest nod, as if he had been waiting for the line to be drawn. "I never wanted to be," he said. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket, crossed the bathroom, and placed a folded slip of paper on the counter beside the sink. "Not from him," he said. "From Daniel. He asked me to keep it if the night ever became honest enough to deserve it." Daniel shut his eyes briefly, like a man caught being more vulnerable than he intended. With that, Adrian opened the door and left. Just like that. No grand exit. No speech. Just the soft sound of the front door closing a few moments later, and the apartment becoming itself again in a way it never truly could. I picked up the paper with shaking fingers and unfolded it. 2 words in Daniel's handwriting. "Come find clarity." That was all. No date. No explanation. But I knew immediately it was old. The fold had softened from time. He had written it long before that night. Long before the bathroom. Long before the three of us stood in steam and truth and dread trying to decide what kind of marriage would survive the edge. He had known we were drifting. He had known before I admitted it. And instead of forcing the conversation, he had hidden himself inside care and performance and silence until his desire for honesty twisted into something darker, more dangerous, more humiliating for both of us. We stayed in the bathroom a long time after Adrian left, not touching much, talking, really talking, maybe for the first time in a year. Daniel admitted he had watched me disappear and not known how to call me back without sounding accusing or weak. He admitted that seeing Adrian notice me awakened something in him he didn't know how to name, and that he had hated himself for wanting the proof of my desirability and the proof of my honesty at the same time. He said the word voyeur once, only once, and even then like a confession rather than a thrill. It did not sound glamorous coming from him. It sounded lonely. I told him I had wanted to be wanted, yes, but not as a performance, not as a game, not as an excuse to burn my life down. I told him the worst part of the night was not that another man had crossed close to me. It was that part of me had been grateful to feel alive enough to tremble. Daniel cried once, quietly, covering his face with his hand as if embarrassed by the sound of it. I had never seen him do that. I loved him fiercely in that moment, and I was furious with him, and ashamed, and relieved, and still, maddeningly, not fully innocent in my own body. That is what no one tells you about marriage and desire and truth. Revelation does not arrive sorted into moral categories that make you look noble. By the time we finally came back downstairs, the party had almost emptied itself. The apartment looked like all gatherings do at the end. Glasses abandoned on surfaces, a serving spoon resting inside a bowl no one would touch again, candles burned lower than intended. Life after performance, we said goodnight to the remaining guests with the calm, practiced ease of 2 people nobody would suspect had just stood in a bathroom and dragged the hidden architecture of their marriage into the light. Then we locked the door. The aftermath was not cinematic. There was no immediate transformation, no sudden perfect honesty, no glorious rebirth under moonlight, no dramatic decision about opening the marriage or closing it tighter or turning one night into a philosophy. There was work, the hardest kind, because it had no costume. The next morning, I reopened the door to my old studio space across town. I had kept it all these years, though kept is too generous a word for what I had really done. I had been paying rent on a room full of silence and old canvases and dried tubes of paint, as if maintaining the possibility counted as devotion. It smelled like dust and turpentine and abandonment. I stood in the middle of it and cried, not because I was moved by art, because I had left a whole version of myself there, and then trained everyone around me, including my husband, to act as though the loss was sophisticated. Daniel started therapy the week after that, which surprised me only because he volunteered before I asked. He said he needed to understand the shape of his own wanting before he ever tried to involve me in it again. He said the night with Adrian had shown him two things at once: how much he wanted me awake inside our marriage, and how badly he had gone about trying to wake me. We had ugly conversations after that. Necessary ones. About sex, yes, but more importantly about power. About silence. About how easily care can become curation, and curation can become control. About the difference between being generous and being edited down into someone easier to love. About my resentment. About his fear. About how often we had both mistaken good manners for intimacy. Adrian never came back to the apartment. He sent one message to Daniel a week later, nothing dramatic. Glad you told the truth. Take care of her honestly. Then he disappeared back into whatever life had formed him before he wandered through hours, like a match dragged too close to dry paper. For a while, I hated him a little for how easily he returned to distance, while Daniel and I were left standing in the burn marks. Later, I understood that his leaving was the cleanest thing any of us had done. Months passed. I painted again, badly at first, then urgently, then with something like hunger, not because the work was brilliant, and not because returning to it fixed anything magical between Daniel and me, but because making something with my own hands reminded me I still existed outside the roles I had polished into place. Daniel came to the studio once and stood very quietly while I worked. He did not offer opinions. He did not ask for comfort. He simply watched me with tears in his eyes and said, "I forgot this was who you were before I met you." No, I told him. You didn't forget. I helped you forget. That was one of the hardest truths of all. I had participated in my own erasure. Not all of it. Not the whole system. But enough that reclaiming myself required more than blaming him. Love does not survive on blame any better than it survives on silence. What it can sometimes survive, if both people are brave enough and lucky enough and ashamed enough in the right ways, is exposure. Not just bodies, selves. Daniel and I were never the same after that night. Thank God. A marriage that survives a threshold like that should not remain unchanged. If it does, then nothing true happened inside it. What changed between us was not that we became reckless. We didn't. It was that we stopped pretending our safest selves were our truest selves. We began saying difficult things sooner. He stopped dressing his fear up as composure. I stopped offering gratitude in place of desire. We learned that comfort is not always kindness, and that being chosen again means much more when both people finally arrive unedited. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the bathroom, the steam on the mirror, the knock at the door, Adrian's hand on the knob, Daniel's voice telling me not to look away, the folded note on the counter, the feeling that one wrong sentence could have broken everything, and one honest one might yet save it. People love to imagine that the climax of a story like this is the moment a line is crossed. It is. The real climax is the moment someone tells the truth before it is flattering. Mine came in a steam-filled bathroom over the muffled pulse of music from downstairs, when I realized I was not choosing between two men at all. I was choosing whether to go back to sleep inside my own life. I didn't. That is the version of the story I can live with now. Not that another man wanted me. Not that my husband watched. Not even that all three of us stood at the edge of something we would have condemned in cleaner language a year earlier. The version I can live with is this. My marriage had become a beautiful room with no open windows. And for one terrifying night, all the hidden air rushed in at once. The last image I carry is not of the bathroom. It is later, much later. Daniel and I standing side by side on the balcony after midnight. The city spread below us in trembling gold and white. No music, no guests, no third person, just the sound of traffic far beneath us and the wind lifting the hair at the back of my neck. We were not healed. I want to be careful with that word. We were uncertain, exposed, a little afraid of ourselves and each other in new ways. But for the first time in a long time, we were not pretending to be fine. Daniel reached for my hand. I let him take it. And there, above the city, with all that light below us and all that difficult honesty still fresh between us, I understood something I had been too careful to learn sooner. Love does not survive by avoiding temptation. It survives, if it survives at all, by telling the truth before politeness kills it. We stood there for a long time without speaking, side by side, exposed, uncertain, very much alive.